Hey guys, Baz here. So the last video, I made a tutorial on how to use mushrooms to create like a 3D model from videos you've taken, and now I'm going to make the part 1 to that kind of part 2. So let's start with the basics. What will you need? How do I do the lighting and the location? What objects are scannable? How do I take the photos? And generally the processing. Okay, so first off, we'll talk about what we need to make like a decent scan. A camera or a smartphone camera is pretty good. It's better to use like a proper camera, something with a larger lens, something with less noise, as smartphone cameras tend to have more noise inside the pictures. They use a lot more processing and stuff to try and smoothen it out. Yeah, so basically you need a higher quality camera. So things like a 4K camera is what I used for my wheel scan, but by no means it isn't necessary. You can in fact use a 1080p one for a decent scan, but in general you'll have less data for the software to compare off, so just expect the accuracy to be quite a lot lower. So the next thing you'll need to do is find a place to do your scan. This is because most of the scanning process requires a very neutral lighting, so as neutral lighting as possible. And the reason we do this is that lighting information can get baked into your image, like the image texture for your model. This means that you can get like dark shadows and stuff that when it's thrown into your render engine will make those shadows even darker because you've got baked in lighting data. It makes the scene look less realistic and kind of makes it look muddy.
So as you can see right now, it's pretty matte lighting. You've got a little bit of reflections and stuff, just a little bit, but in general, the lighting's pretty neutral because as you can see, it's not overcast, but it's quite close. So because of this, you can get a fairly decent scan.
The easiest way to get a good neutral photo of your object is to wait for an overcast day or use some sort of like diffuse lighting technique, such as using like a high-powered light with like a sheet over it or something. So some form of diffuse lighting to try and get the room to be as neutral as possible if you're doing it indoors. But yeah, it's mostly just to try and preserve the color as correctly as possible and try and keep it as neutral so you don't have, baked in lighter data and all that sort of thing. So the next part will be, how do you take the photos? So when you're taking a photo, you need to be mindful of artifacts caused by motion blur. And basically you try and reduce the amount of smearing and stuff as possible. So you'll need to hold your camera or your phone, depending on if you're going to be recording it or taking individual photos, and you need to make sure that you get a slow moving and rotate slowly around the object and try and get high and low angles to try and get as much 360 coverage of the model as possible. If you see in this scan here, I took a scan of the wheel. You need to do a 360 walk around, otherwise you'll get things like this, which can occur, which is where you get holes in your mesh because that data was never recorded, so it can't 3D scan and then turn it into a mesh because there's nothing there, there's no information. So the next part we'll talk about is what objects are scannable. So a scannable object is an object with the least amount of reflections and as least amount of uniform color. So what do I really mean by that? So just say you wanted to have a scanned car. What would the result be when you finish it? A car has quite a glossy covering over, which means that light interacts with it differently as you change perspective. This means that you get this like erratic lighting conditions that are occurring on the surface of it, and every time you take pictures, the software's not going to be able to figure out similar traits between it because it keeps changing. So the reason for this is because of how the scanning process works. The computer processes the information, grabs two photos, and then compares the two of them with like traits, as seen by these little red dots that can appear in the picture. Then using it, it figures out where the camera is and where the points are. This means that a good scan comes from an object that is as similar as possible across the entire all of the pictures. So something that doesn't change in color, that doesn't have like reflections or things like that. Another thing to talk about is probably the background. So the background of your scanned object is just as important as the focal point, so the thing that's in the picture. And the reason for that is that the background is used as like a context menu, like a way to figure out where the camera is in correlation to the object you're scanning around. So basically, it's being used to figure out where the center of the object is. So the TLDR is find an object with uniform lighting along with zero to little reflections as possible, and make sure that the background is still fairly visible, so that as you do your scan and as you move around it, you're keeping as much information consistent with every photo basically as possible. Another thing is that complexity matters. For instance, you see this gas bottle that I attempted to scan here. You can see the object is quite matte in a single color. It's this like, off grayish tone. This means that the software doesn't have any key points to compare itself off and loses tracking of the object constantly. This results in example A, this deep fried thing, along with, being able to show the object doesn't get too thin in some places, but also keep the mesh in a more block, solid mesh. Now we have a good idea of what is needed for a good scan, let's recap. Neutral lighting, slow movements to cause as little motion blur as possible. Object cannot reflect much light and have, a changing material. The object cannot be too thin. So, with all this, you should be able to take a decent scan. So, there's a lot of little things to be careful of, and obviously some objects you won't be able to scan properly without, matte sprays or something like that, which is like a spray can of like spray paint that dissolves after a while that reduces reflectivity. So it basically just makes a rough surface so the scan can keep taking it. But yeah, so there is a few ways to do scans of things that are glossy and reflective, like putting tape on them, so you actually have like a reference point by making angled pieces of tape and stuff. It means that the software can actually tell what's going on. For instance, this gas bottle here, I could probably put rings of tape around the outside of it to make sure it always has context of what's going on. Even put dots on it or something like that to give it as much information as possible so it can actually figure out, what's going on. So at the end of this, you should have your own very own 3D scan, and obviously you'll have to watch the next video to be able to see, how to use it inside the software, which we've used Meshroom for that. And you can upload it to anywhere, you can sell it or use it for your own 3D scenes. So anyway, see you guys.